Welcome to Unseen Rite, where history isn't just forgotten, it's buried for a reason. Tonight, we journey into the untouched backwoods of 1834 Kentucky, to a town so small it never made it on most maps, and to a family the church refused to speak of. This is the story of Rebecca and Rachel Morrison, twin girls born under an eclipse, raised in silence, and vanished without a trace. But what they left behind should have never been read. Before we continue the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss the dark truths we uncover every week. And tell us, what state are you listening from? We love hearing from our viewers across America. Now let's go back. The year is 1834. The setting, a damp, fog-covered stretch of farmland just outside Somerset, Kentucky. A fire crackles in a modest wooden chapel. Inside, a man sits hunched over a stack of handwritten pages. His name is Reverend William Phillips, and he's writing down something he swore he'd never tell. Two young girls, the Morrison twins, had been attending his Sunday sermons for months, but something about them was wrong. Not in appearance. No, they looked like any other children, but it was their eyes. They didn't blink during the hymns. They mouthed the scripture before he even spoke it, and worse, they knew things. At first, it was little details. Rebecca told a shopkeeper his brother didn't drown, that he was still alive, hiding in Ohio. Days later, the brother returned, covered in frostbite. Then Rachel whispered into the ear of an elderly widow, revealing where her husband had buried his final will. She found it exactly where the girl said. But it wasn't just knowledge of the past. They began predicting things: a lightning strike during a baptism, the collapse of the chapel's bell tower, a stillbirth down to the exact minute. The townspeople were divided. Some believed the girls were angels, others demons. And all the while, their father, Elijah Morrison, kept them hidden from visitors. No schooling, no friends, no laughter, just long walks into the woods, and strange visitors in black coats who never stayed long. The Journal of Reverend Phillips, uncovered in 1987 behind the chapel's pulpit, ends its first entry with a line scrawled in trembling ink. They don't guess, they remember, but the question is, from where? By the summer of 1834, Somerset had changed. It wasn't just the unnerving calm that settled over the town, or the way livestock began refusing to approach the Morrison property. It was in the people. Once joyful neighbors now crossed streets to avoid each other. Children refused to play outside after dusk, and at the center of it all were the twins. Rebecca and Rachel, now 9 years old, had stopped speaking altogether, not a word in weeks. Instead, they communicated with each other through subtle glances and a strange clicking sound, a rhythm that seemed coded, like a language only they knew. Pastor Phillips noted in his second journal entry, "When they enter the church, the air shifts. My lungs seize as if underwater. They bring something with them, something old." Rumors spread fast. Some claimed the girls were possessed, others believed they were divine oracles, but no one could explain how they knew the hidden sins of half the congregation, the blacksmith's affair, the midwife's theft, even Philip's own secret, the child he'd buried at the edge of town and never told a soul about. That secret surfaced one Sunday. Without warning, Rebecca turned during the sermon, pointed at the pastor, and in a flat, lifeless voice said, "You left him in the rain." Phillips collapsed. The townspeople were horrified and fascinated. They begged the father, Elijah, to let scientists study them. One doctor from Louisville arrived with calipers and scalpels. He left the same night, white-faced and silent. His journal would later reveal only one phrase: "The blood, it's not right." Then came the man in black. Witnesses described him as tall, expressionless, dressed in a coat too fine for the dust-choked streets of Somerset. He arrived on a moonless night, walked straight into the Morrison home, and left before sunrise. No one saw him enter. No one saw him leave. But the twins began changing after that. They stopped attending church. Their hair began falling out in patches. Neighbors reported hearing high-pitched humming late at night, like wires straining under pressure. One woman claimed she saw them standing in a field, unmoving, staring up at the sky for over 3 hours. And then the animals began dying, one by one, dogs, goats, horses, all found with burst eardrums and eyes wide open, as if they'd seen something they couldn't comprehend. Whatever visited that house in black didn't leave empty-handed. The town's silence grew louder, but Reverend Phillips kept writing. The journal entries took a darker turn in late September. Reverend Phillips, once confident in scripture, began questioning everything he had ever preached. His handwriting grew erratic, margins filled with panicked sketches, spirals, twin circles, figures with elongated limbs and eyes like mirrors. He wrote of waking dreams, shadow voices, and the sensation of being watched even when alone in his study. He described one night in detail. I awoke to a sound, not of this earth, a low harmonic vibration. My walls pulsed, my breath caught. I opened my eyes, and there they were, Rebecca and Rachel, standing at the foot of my bed, eyes glazed, mouths moving but no sound. Behind them, a third figure, human in shape, but hollow, light bent around it. I could not see its face, but I felt it probing my thoughts. That same week, 5 townspeople reportedly went mad. Mrs. Langston, a well-respected schoolteacher, began speaking in a tongue no one recognized, scribbling symbols on the church floor. Sheriff Dalton locked himself in the jailhouse and refused to come out for 3 days. A boy was found in the woods whispering, "They know what you are," over and over, clutching a clump of his own hair. A town meeting was called. The consensus was clear. The Morrison twins were no longer children. They were something else. Elijah Morrison refused to attend. The man had grown pale, gaunt, distant. When a neighbor confronted him, he simply replied, "I was warned this would happen. I thought I could protect them." What had he meant? That night, Reverend Phillips returned to the Morrison home, journal in hand, determined to confront whatever force had infected the family. What he described in his final entry before tearing out the next 5 pages chills the soul. The girls were not asleep. They were humming again, a frequency that made my vision blur. On the wall above their beds, words were scratched in ash. "Do not study them." The room was cold, colder than death. And then the air changed, gravity reversed, my blood ran sideways. A voice, deep and feminine, echoed without sound. "They are anchors, keys. You broke the seal." The next morning, the church windows shattered without explanation. Every clock in Somerset stopped at 3:17 a.m. No one saw the twins for 3 days. But their influence? It was only beginning to spread. On October 4th, 1834, the town of Somerset woke to silence. Not just quiet, a vacuum, no birds, no wind. Even the horses refused to neigh. It was as if sound itself had been swallowed. The silence broke at 10:09 a.m. All at once, screams rang out from the western side of town. 3 families, the Whitakers, the Dowds, and the preacher's assistant, collapsed in unison. When neighbors rushed in, they found them writhing, clawing at their ears, speaking in perfect unison. "We remember Eden. We remember the gate. We are not supposed to be here." They were committed to the nearest asylum that evening. They never spoke again. Meanwhile, Reverend Phillips' journal, now in the possession of a town elder, continued revealing fragments of the unspeakable. His entries described how Rachel and Rebecca no longer cast shadows, how mirrors refused to reflect them, and how, late at night, they seemed to phase in and out of the walls as though the house itself couldn't hold them. He called it dimensional interference. And then he wrote this: "They've begun drawing circles on the floor, not childish doodles, geometric impossibilities, symbols with rotational symmetry I've never seen. One is always awake while the other sleeps. They've stopped blinking altogether." The town's physician, Dr. Isaiah Caldwell, tried to study the girls. But upon entering the Morrison house, he collapsed after 5 minutes, foaming at the mouth. When he awoke, his pupils were gone, pure white. He could no longer remember his own name, but he kept muttering one phrase. They peeled back the veil. "We are insects, we are insects." The local pastor, fearing the town would descend into chaos, gathered his most trusted parishioners and declared the children were possessed. A ritual of purification was planned for the following Sabbath. But on October 6th, the Morrison family vanished. No signs of struggle, no footprints, only a single phrase carved into the doorframe in blackened wood. "We are the cost." 3 days later, a swarm of dead birds fell across the cemetery, all of them with burned-out eyes. And beneath the pastor's church floorboards, someone found a journal page that hadn't been there before, written not by the reverend, but in a perfect, mirrored hand. It simply read, "They were never yours to judge." What had Somerset awakened? What gate had the twins opened? By November, the entire region was infected, not by disease, but by something far more intangible and far more destructive. Whispers everywhere. In the fields, families claimed the corn spoke to them in children's voices. A milkmaid in Harrodsburg tore out her own tongue after hearing Rachel's lullaby echo from a dried-up well. Horses refused to pass the Morrison property. Dogs howled and clawed at the earth whenever they neared it. The house itself, still standing. Windows untouched, doors shut, but those who dared to peek inside said the furniture was floating, that the walls had no corners, and the family Bible was rewritten. Every verse twisted. In the book of Genesis, instead of "Let there be light," the page read, "Let there be watchers." The most chilling part, every clock in town, grandfather clocks, pocket watches, even sundials, stopped at 11:11 the night the twins vanished, and they never ticked again. Meanwhile, Reverend Phillips's final journal entry surfaced. It was discovered by his niece, hidden in the lining of his winter coat after he disappeared from his locked room. It read, "I was wrong. They are not possessed. They are the vessel. The church failed them. God abandoned them, and something else filled the void." He ended the entry with a phrase circled 3 times, the 13th verse. But no one knew what it meant. The Bible, as far as scholars knew, didn't contain such a passage, until a theology professor from Lexington unearthed an ancient apocryphal text, banned by the Vatican centuries earlier. Hidden within its pages was a forgotten chapter, never canonized, never discussed. The final verse read, "And from the womb of duality shall rise the mirrors. They shall see what was not meant, and through them the silence shall speak." The town council tried to silence everything. They burned documents, paid off witnesses, labeled it mass hysteria. But they couldn't erase the blackened circles appearing on walls across town, circles that bled when touched. The official narrative blamed the disappearances on fever, superstition, and poverty. But ask the locals, ask the descendants of Somerset's oldest families, and they'll tell you the twins never left. They're watching, waiting for someone to finish what they started. And this is where it gets worse. In the spring of 1835, 5 months after the Morrison twins vanished, an anonymous envelope was delivered to the Lexington Herald. No return address, no handwriting, just a wax seal. 2 mirrored crescent moons, inverted and fused. Inside was a single page, photographic memory etched in ink. A detailed drawing of the Morrison home, with one difference. A new door had appeared, not on the front, not on the side, but inside the nursery, beneath the crib where the twins once slept. A trap door, one no one remembered being there. The message written beneath it said only, "They opened it, now you must close it." Investigators, skeptics and believers alike were drawn to the property, but when they arrived, the house was gone. Gone. Not burned, not collapsed, just missing. The grass beneath it flattened but unbroken, like something impossibly massive had been lifted clean from the earth. And in its place, 13 stones arranged in a perfect circle, no markings, no erosion, cold to the touch even in sunlight. They pulsed when people approached. 3 men went missing within a week. The first was an archaeologist from Virginia who claimed the formation aligned with a constellation only visible during a solar eclipse. The second, a Methodist preacher who swore he heard the twins laughing inside his dreams. The third, a Boy Scout leader on a hike with 12 students, none of whom remember entering the field, only waking up miles away, dehydrated and crying. Every camera that tried to capture the circle failed. Photographs came out blank, videos distorted. One tape, salvaged from a broken camcorder, showed only static until the final 2 seconds when a child's voice whispered, "They see what you bury." And now, as we cross the halfway point of this story, I have to ask you directly. Comment below, the mirrors have returned. Type it twice. Once to acknowledge what you've learned, once to never unsee it. These aren't just ghost stories. This is history, suppressed, buried, and fed to the silence. If you followed this far, then you already feel it. Something ancient stirs beneath the surface. Not evil, not exactly, but indifferent to sanity, to order, to what we call truth. And it started with 2 little girls who saw too much. Had returned, just not in the way anyone expected. Weeks after the incident with the stone circle, a letter was discovered in the hollow trunk of an elm tree, 3 miles from the Morrison site. It was addressed to no one. The paper was aged, but the ink fresh. It read, "They did not vanish, they split." What followed was a chilling sequence of sketches. 2 girls, hand in hand, standing before a mirror, not reflecting them, but multiplying them. Behind them stood a third figure, taller, cloaked, faceless. Each drawing became more abstract, as if the artist was descending into madness or glimpsing something not meant for the human eye. That same week, 2 more sets of twins were reported missing in neighboring counties. Both pairs had recently visited a church revival hosted by a preacher who claimed to receive messages from the veiled children. His sermons were said to cause nosebleeds, hallucinations, even blackouts. He was found unconscious in his tent 3 days later, surrounded by mirrors, each shattered from the inside. In his journal, a single phrase was scrawled repeatedly. "One reflects, one absorbs, one escapes." Historians tried to write this off as hysteria, a moral panic. But the government quietly sealed off the area. Locals were relocated. And by 1837, no official maps showed the Morrison homestead or anything around it. Gone, erased. But survivors of the original search party, those who felt the wrongness of that place, spoke in hushed tones about what they saw inside the crater where the house once stood. It wasn't just grass, it was flesh. A membrane, stretched and pulsing like a heartbeat buried under soil. They said it whispered their names. They said it knew what they'd done. And in the years that followed, they died one by one, each found with shards of mirror glass in their hands and expressions frozen in terror. This wasn't folklore, this was containment. Not to protect the people from the truth, but to protect the truth from the people. And the truth is this: the Morrison twins didn't vanish. They evolved. Into what, no one can say. But something ancient looked through their eyes, and it liked what it saw. By the winter of 1834, Cedar Hollow was a ghost town. The few remaining residents no longer spoke of the Morrison twins, not out of fear, but because something deeper had taken hold. A silence, not the absence of sound, but a pressure, a presence. People described it as thinking too loud, as if their own minds were no longer private. Then came the dreams. Shared across multiple households, identical down to the last detail. A black corridor filled with mirrors, each one showing the dreamer an event they'd never experienced, but somehow remembered. In one mirror, a child stood in a circle of salt, speaking backwards. In another, a woman split into 2, her skin peeling like paper, revealing a twin beneath with hollow eyes and no mouth. The town doctor, Dr. Alton Graves, recorded these dreams in his medical journal. He was rational, skeptical, but even he couldn't explain why patients bled from the nose every time they tried to describe what they'd seen. And on January 12, 1835, Graves disappeared. His journal was later found under the floorboards of the abandoned chapel. The final entry read, "They're not dreams, they're transmissions. Memory is no longer chronological. Time isn't moving forward, it's folding. The twins are the key." The state eventually sent in a surveyor's crew to inspect the area for redevelopment. They were never heard from again. Only one artifact was retrieved, an iron crucifix warped into a spiral. On it, carved with obsessive precision, were the words, "They see what we refuse, they pay for our sins." Same phrase, different hand. And as these details emerged, the federal government stepped in, not to investigate but to erase. All town records of Cedar Hollow were sealed, then reclassified as lost due to fire. But there was no fire. There was a containment. Because by now, whispers had started to reach Washington. Whispers about what the twins had become and what they were teaching others. There were rumors of a third Morrison child, one never recorded in census data. One who hadn't vanished but instead traveled. A boy. Reclusive. Unremarkable. Until he opened his mouth and spoke words in a language that made grown men weep and forget their own names. If Rebecca and Rachel were conduits, he was a beacon, and whatever followed him was not human. They called him Isaiah, though no birth record, baptism certificate, or family Bible ever mentioned that name. Locals believed he was the youngest Morrison sibling. Born in secret, hidden from the community after rumors began to swirl about Rebecca and Rachel. According to scattered fragments in Pastor Phillips's journal, he was born on November 18, 1834, the very night the twins and their father disappeared. But here's where the story fractures. The midwife who claimed to have delivered him, Eleanor Brewster, recorded in her private diary that he never cried, not once. She wrote, "He looked straight into me, as if he knew what I had done in 1799. She died 2 days later. Heart attack, they said, but her daughter swore she'd gone blind before it happened." By 1836, whispers of Isaiah began to circulate in distant towns, Louisville, Lexington, even parts of southern Ohio. People described a pale boy with mismatched eyes, one blue, one black, who would appear at night and ask questions he should not know to ask. He asked widows about their husbands' final moments, describing them in perfect detail. He asked soldiers about battles they'd fought, quoting orders never written down. And he asked children what they dreamed of, only to tell them how it would end. Wherever he went, people changed. Some became devout, building strange shrines beneath their homes. Others went mad, carving symbols into their walls, refusing to eat, speaking in riddles until they were institutionalized. A traveling scholar, Dr. Julian Renner, published a short-lived pamphlet in 1839 titled The Silent Prophet, a case study in pre-linguistic transmission. It was banned within months. Every known copy was destroyed, except one, discovered inside a hidden compartment in an antique lectern. The most disturbing passage reads, "Isaiah does not learn. He reminds. He speaks in loops. His voice fractures time. He isn't the aftermath of the twins. He's the precursor." That single word changed everything. Precursor. Was he born that night, or had he always existed? A hidden force, manifesting only when the veil between memory and reality grows thin? Some began to believe Isaiah was not a child at all, not even human, but a thought, ancient and contagious, a living idea passed down like a genetic curse. And wherever Isaiah appeared, the clocks would stop for 7 seconds, every time. 7 seconds of silence. That's all it ever took. The town clocks, mechanical, wind-driven, immune to manipulation, would freeze. Eyewitnesses across 3 states confirmed it. The ticking halted, pendulums hung in midair, and no one remembered those 7 seconds afterward, just a ringing in the ears, and a feeling that something was standing just behind them. In early 1840, a Quaker cartographer named Elias Finch recorded one such event in his weather log. 3:47 p.m., timepiece froze while surveying at Briar Hill. Light dimmed though sun unclouded, detected presence behind left shoulder, turned, no one, felt examined. Finch died 1 week later. His tongue had turned completely black, and the word remember was found etched into the inside of his mouth. At this point, the federal government took notice. A secret task force, later codenamed Project Evergreen, was dispatched under the guise of a census operation. Their mission? Locate the entity referred to as Isaiah and suppress any community in which he was cited. But Isaiah wasn't running, he was teaching. According to classified letters leaked decades later, Evergreen agents who encountered him reported symptoms ranging from severe hallucinations to memory collapse. One agent claimed to wake up in a stranger's home, married to a woman he'd never met, with children who called him Papa. Another returned to headquarters, speaking a dialect no one could identify, a language described only as wet, like drowning syllables. Worse still, children who spent more than 60 minutes in Isaiah's presence began showing identical dreams. Dark tunnels, inverted crosses, endless libraries with no exits, and whispers from behind bookshelves that smelled of burnt sugar. Church leaders were the first to panic. In 1841, 4 churches across Kentucky and Ohio abruptly closed their doors, claiming the land beneath them was no longer sanctified. One pastor was found hanging upside down in his pulpit, his final sermons scrawled backward on the walls in tar. He's not a boy, he's the echo of something we buried alive. Then came the disappearances, entire families vanishing from census records, homes left with dinner still hot on the table, journals half written, horses tied up out front, confused and starving, all within towns where Isaiah had passed. But here's what makes it worse. The closer they got to him, the more they forgot why they were looking. He didn't just erase memory, he rewrote it. The final sighting came from a man named Dr. Malcolm Edridge, a frontier psychologist decades ahead of his time. Though many questioned if his knowledge came from human sources, he had heard whispers of the Morrison twins and their guide, and took it upon himself to locate the family after their 1834 disappearance. What he uncovered was not a family. It was a phenomenon. Edridge kept his journals sealed in double-locked iron chests, but a single page was discovered, hidden inside a hollowed-out hymn book decades later. Rachel no longer blinks. Rebecca doesn't cast a shadow. Their voices harmonize when they speak, as if something older is speaking through them. Edridge described the father, Henry Morrison, as a vessel emptied by grief and filled by something ancient. The man no longer responded to his name. Instead, he answered only to the phrase, "Witness of the third veil." And then Edridge met Isaiah. He never described the encounter directly, but he left behind 63 pages of circular symbols, none of which matched any known language, ancient or modern. Some patterns resembled mandalas, others looked like spinal X-rays woven into constellations. At the center of every page, a pair of eyes. Edridge's final entry was short, just one sentence. What they call madness is merely the first stage of remembering. Then nothing. No record of his death, no funeral, no estate. Only an empty study, the walls lined with mirrors, all facing inward. And in each mirror, the same thing, a faint image of 2 girls holding hands in the distance, backs turned, standing beneath a blood-red sky. Every attempt to photograph or film the study failed. Equipment would glitch, film would burn, and audio would warp into indecipherable static, except for a single phrase, looped over and over in a child's voice. They see what we refuse, they pay for our sins. That's the line found on the blood-stained page, the only piece left after the Morrison house was consumed in an unexplained fire in 1842, a fire that burned blue. No source, no accelerant, and no remains. Locals claim they still see the twins walking the woods on moonless nights, sometimes whispering, sometimes humming an old hymn no one recognizes. But those who follow the sound, they never come back whole. They return different, changed, marked. And worse, some come back without their eyes. There's a final truth, hidden in the folds of time, buried so deep it wasn't meant to be remembered, let alone spoken aloud. But here, now, with you, it must be said. Welcome to the last room of the Morrison legacy. In 1921, nearly a century after the twins vanished, a construction crew clearing forest land near the ruins of the Morrison home unearthed a stone circle buried beneath the roots of an ancient ash tree. In its center, a sealed iron box. Inside, not bones, not relics, but a second journal, not from Henry, not from Pastor Phillips, not from Edridge. This one belonged to Rachel. Her handwriting was unchildlike, precise, geometric. She wrote in spirals, and she didn't tell a story. She gave instructions, not for summoning, but for remembering. Rituals meant to peel back the layers of forgetfulness humanity was conditioned to carry. A map of consciousness wrapped in blood, ash, and hymns that never charted on any church ledger. Her final passage. We were shown what waits at the root of all things, a presence not evil but indifferent. It feeds on forgetting. It waits in churches, in schools, in lullabies. It taught your fathers to kneel, your mothers to hush, and your teachers to smile while erasing the truth. And now it waits for you. And beside that final page was a sketch. Two girls, hand in hand, facing a vast cathedral of shadows. The towers were made of spines, the windows were eyes, and beneath it, scrawled in red, "We went first, you go next." The journal disintegrated within hours of being opened, but the workers who found it, all 5, vanished within a week. No missing persons reports, no media coverage, no obituaries, because the deeper you go into this story, the more you realize you were never supposed to hear it. You were meant to dismiss it, to forget it, to move on. But now you know, the Morrison twins weren't an anomaly. They were a signal, a breach. And every so often, when the veil thins, you'll see them. In a dream, in a reflection, in the silence between your thoughts. Their eyes will be waiting, not to scare you, but to remind you you've already been chosen. And once you've heard the hymn, you never really sleep again.